Now it's working. Hi. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thanks, Kelly. Right, let me see. So hopefully you can see me now. It seems to be working. It was just going live and spinning its wheels for a couple of minutes. Who's in the house? Hi, Jonesy. Fellow Sinophiles, absolutely. Hi, Mike, Kelly, Rich, Bella, and Kim. This is like waiting for a good movie to start. Oh, thank you. Barbara, hi. Hi, Richard. Got here. That's fine. I was late starting. Thanks, Fujao. Thanks, Mike. All working. Well, got my tea. So, what I don't have this week is nobody sent me KK, hi, and Josh. Hi, Matteo. Well, it's like waiting for a good movie to start, but not to disappoint you, but there's not much of a movie. Nobody sent me any questions. So what I thought we'd do is talk a little bit. If anybody has any questions about training, hi Esther, any questions about your own practice, any blocks, stumbling points, sticking points, like, so some of you guys are in my academy, some are learning from the Nugget, some have bought the programs on the online platform. Obviously there's no live classes at the moment, so it's difficult, isn't it, for motivation, where you're going, how you're improving. So, oh, good, Jonesy. Yeah, type away. Ask me any question. So what I thought I'd talk a little bit about was to ask you guys where your sticking points are, where you feel like you're not making the progress you want to be, how we can help, any way I can help. So it could be in the physical side, for example, strength training, flexibility, cardio, or your forms, your techniques, anything like that. So Jonesy's questions come up first. So while I look at this and answer this, please some other people type some questions. Okay, so many of the movements and strikes in 𝐒𝐻𝐿 can easily have a grappling throwing interpretation. Absolutely. Mongolian Tibetan wrestling influence, I guess. Yes, would be right. So much of modern Kung Fu seems to have de-emphasized or eradicated use of these techniques, including groundwork. What was the Dung family view on this? Happy to talk about this. Okay, product placement. Yeah, I'll go into that. Sure, Rich. Right, let's talk about Jonesy's question first. My Sifu used to talk about Kung Fu having 5 elements, right? Tekda, Sutla, Dit. And most people today just talk 4, Tekda, Sutla, which means kicking, striking, wrestling, seizing. Okay, but the Dit means falling, which is ground. So that when I first went to China, this is way pre-UFC, right? He would talk about those 5 elements: punch, kick, wrestle, seize, and ground. And so Tit meant things like the falling skills, how to land, trips, sweeps. So for example, when you do a sweep from guard, for example, so someone's on top of you and you flip them over, that's not considered wrestling because you're already on the ground. So that's considered dit skill. So it was part of our training from the beginning. So much modern Kung Fu seems to de-emphasize or eradicated. Yes, because I think because of the de-emphasis of sparring and combat generally. So I think when you have the combative usage, like if you see Sanshao where they brought the full contact back, the wrestling came back. It's inevitable because it's what happens. A lot of people are in for a big shock when they do their Kung Fu forms and suddenly, oh, what's going on? There's wrestling, because you're imagining like somebody's going to stand the perfect distance all the time for your striking. So yes, the 𝐒𝐻𝐿 wrestling is from the Tibetan. My Sifu, because he was very light, it was very easy for people to pick him up. So he really had to work on his wrestling skill. His grandfather, the Hong Kong guy, was a big, strong, solid guy. And he's basically, yeah, please put your hands on me. Please try and grapple me. I'll do one pet joy and I'll break your arm. So he had a totally different emphasis. So like everything else, I mean, you could say the same in modern UFC fighters. Some like to go to the ground, some like to keep it standing. So, but it's definitely part of the training. What was the other question? What was yeah, so I think that's answered that. You obviously saw the need to reincorporating more grappling back into the style. We went from the Sanshao into MMA. I wanted to compete MMA, and you can't compete MMA without learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because that's part of it. And so if you find yourself on the ground in positions and you don't understand the ground game, then you can't compete in MMA. I mean, the idea of just trying to keep it on the feet and never going to the ground is wishful thinking. So you can have that as your plan A for sure, but you have to have a plan B. So I don't think I reincorporated it back into the style. Some of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stuff was never in the style. A lot of Kung Fu people say, oh, we had it all along. No, there's a lot of stuff in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that is not in Chinese Kung Fu. That is not. I'm not saying the choke's a choke, arm lock's an arm lock, but some of the transitions, concepts of guard passing, positional control, positional dominance as well, hierarchy of positions, never learned that in Chinese martial arts. And I don't think it was in there. I think maybe we can re-engineer it back in, but I don't think that was in there. And so why? Because the environment's different. If you're training in an environment where you've got two people and a referee and you're in a cage and he goes to the ground and you're continuing and so on, but if you're on a battlefield where you go to the ground, your mate stabs him with a spear, like judo emphasizes pins. You pin someone down, so someone else on your army can go and stab him. So therefore pins win fights. But Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu evolved from challenge matches. And so what? You've pinned someone down. So what? So they don't give points for that. They give points for actually submission. And so that changed the way it developed, changed the way the style developed. So I would say I had to change because of the different environment. Not necessarily saying one style's lacking or one style's better, but evolution is specific to the environment. Okay, Rich, I'm looking to buy a freestanding punch bag and wrecking ball. Freestanding punch bag, I would go Century, the Century XXL ones. They were the only ones I bought that really stood the test of time. We had some cheaper ones, but they didn't last very long at all. So Century XXL is my recommendation. Wrecking ball, I assume you're talking about the maze ball. The only place I knew that sold maze balls were Blitz. So you can check that. Joan, as I said a few days ago, the main sticking point in 88 is I simply forget which single which I'm on and which section comes when. Okay, so it's a long sequence and movements repeat. And if someone was to say they're trying to learn a long piece of prose or a long piece of music, I mean, what do? You break it into pieces. You repeat it many, many, many times, and you just keep going over it. I mean, I don't really know what to say. You can make certain mnemonics. For example, you've got the five cloud hands before the kicking section. For example, 5 cloud hands before the snake creeps down. After part horse's mane, you go into 4 direction weave shuttles. So after a while, Tony, have you got the experience learning the 𝐒𝐻𝐿 set that when you were learning it, it seemed really, really long, and then after about 5 years, it seems really short? You think, was that it? It's over. It's so quick. And it's the same thing. It's because it's new. It seems really, really, really long, and then you just keep repeating, and after a while, it just becomes short. I don't know how else to say that. Bowl of Kittens. Being twisted. How to train with the differences between side of your body. What diet did the Dung School emphasize, if any, apart from the digestive biscuits? What are your thoughts? Diet is a big subject, but being twisted, how to train with differences between side of your body. You mean in terms of one side's more flexible, one side's stronger, or one side has an injury? That's a problem. I mean, you need to obviously do specific kind of physiotherapeutic kind of practices in order to strengthen the weak muscles and to stretch the tight muscles. You can use some modern stuff, like, for example, foam roller. Do 10 or 15 minutes foam rolling before you start, and then stretch the tight muscles first, and then do the form. That can help. But of course, if there's a more serious injury, you have to adapt the set. That's very hard to say. It has to be tailored to the individual, so you have to adapt it, and then you probably need some some helpful that. But you may find, foam rolling, stretching specifically till you're more or less even before you start. No one's perfectly even both sides of the body though. Everyone has better sides. That's normal. Okay, diet. What are my thoughts? There's lots of stuff about this now. I've read lots of books on the subject. Dung family, well, it's not really about the family. That's more of the Chinese kind of diet. So the Chinese diet have a couple of things which I think is correct and a couple of things not so good if you're looking at modern, although it's probably better than some of the Western diets. The first thing is the concept of fresh. Eat fresh and eat in season, and that makes perfect sense. So what's the freshest stuff, and food in season is probably going to be the best for you because it's what the body needs at that time, nature provides. So having that kind of an approach. The simplest explanation for diet that I ever heard, which was from the kind of paleo school, is basically says this: you go into your supermarket and anything that a caveman wouldn't recognize, don't buy it. So that means fruit, vegetables, eggs, meat, fish, salads, nuts, grains, but not grains. Sorry, not grains. So nothing, breads, pastas. That's out. Chinese eat a lot of rice. I don't. So I have very little grains. So my personal diet is 50% meat and vegetables. So I eat eggs, I eat fish. That's my personal. But I'm not preaching. I'm not saying it's right for everybody, but I tend to be fairly high fat. I use a lot of butter and I add olive oil, oily fish, avocados. I went the low fat way, like experimenting, and I felt dreadful and it was awful. My joints were bad and it just didn't work for me. So once I started adding fats and oils, wow, everything worked better. It was like my body needed it. So high fat, low carbohydrate is my approach. Right. Lucas, what's the latest in this round of the evolution of 𝐒𝐻𝐺 and MMA? Are you adding new ideas or methods into blank areas or refining existing moves more deeply? At the moment, I'm not thinking MMA terms. MMA was really useful to me as a testing ground, to make sure I understood the fight and practically tested a lot of our stuff. That's not where I'm currently at, but it may be where I go back to. But I kind of felt that I'd done what I'd set out to do in that area, in that environment. So looking at some different things at the moment. And you're adding new ideas or methods into blank areas. I don't know. The exciting thing is when you find out you have a blank area and then you're like, whoa, I'm missing that. At the moment, I'm not aware. I'm sure there are some, but I'm going at the moment, especially because of lockdown and not being able to spar and stuff. So I'm really going back more to the classical stuff and looking more deeply into some of the more traditional stuff. Been translating my Sifu's books and really working and sending him videos of some old stuff and having his feedback on that. And that's kind of where I'm at the moment, but that may change. That may change. What is the late? A bit of grappling goes a long way. Will you be covering in the academy? Yes, what I believe is right. A little grappling goes a long way. I think we can have like a minimalist approach that would be for self-defense. For MMA is different because people know so many moves. You have to be able to counter them. You have to know all the submissions at the very least, so you don't get caught in them. You have to know the counters. You have to know the positions. But for self-defense, if you're training more for self-defense, it's very unlikely someone's going to attack you with a leg lock or something like that. However, it is very likely you may find yourself underneath somebody. So escapes are really important. Learning how to escape the basic positions, get back to your feet, and then adding things that are not legal for MMA, like, groin kicks and things like that to functionalize it for that environment. Weapons training with ground. And we used to do knife sparring, and then when it goes to the ground, some of the jiu-jitsu works beautifully, and some of it is just really dangerous when you have weapons. So that's an interesting line. Stick grappling is another thing which we played around with. Over the years, we've experimented with many things, but yeah. There is a kind of a minimalist approach where you have 10 techniques. You can cover most things that you would need. for self-defense. But if you want to go deeply into it, you know, it's a whole art in itself, and I suggest studying with a specialist in that area, which is not me. But you know, I did a few years with one of the top teachers in the world, but I never specialized in that area. It was always a means to an end. I felt like with the 24 now seems so short. Yeah, it's how it works. Absolutely. Born that way, born twisted. I see. Oh yeah, about an injury. Born that way. So yeah, most people have one side more flexible. So if it's born that way as opposed to an injury, I would suggest work on your weak side more and stretch out your tight side more first. Yeah. Lucas, what is available at a given time is what the body has developed to need. Oh, I see. Yeah, yin and yang, right? Nature provides, or we've adapted to take what. Here's the thing: we use language, and it separates. Language separates. So when we say something, we say what nature gives us, and that's a convention of language because we are nature. We're not separate. So really, the two things are one. Don't eat anything God never heard of. Yeah. Fair enough. Sausage and egg sandwich. Every diet has a cheat day, or at least some what's the word? I deliberately schedule when I do a diet, or I'm trying to be very strict. Like if I'm training for a specific event, or I want to get into like really, really good shape for something, I will always schedule cheat meals. And so that's a psychological thing as well. Well, there's two reasons for that. One is if there's something you really fancy and you say, I'll never ever again eat a donut in my life, and then it becomes a big deal for you, and then you end up getting, repressing the urge, and then it comes out, then you end up eating a whole packet or whatever. So the idea is if you say, right, Saturday night, for example, I can have whatever I want, and I'm putting off that sticky toffee pudding for Saturday night. I'm delaying the gratification. And of course, what happens is Saturday night comes along. You may or may not fancy it. If you do, great. If you don't. But so that's a psychological thing. The other thing is about the insulin resistance, that it's a good idea once a week to spike insulin. So although I say low carbohydrate, I do have cheat meals where I'll eat anything I like, desserts and everything. So that will reset the insulin sensitivity. But if you don't want to put weight on, that's once a week. That's my advice. I don't always stick to it. I'm not claiming to be a perfect example, but when I do it, it works very well for me. And yeah. Okay, sausage and egg sandwich. So yeah, that was my cheat. Dr. Andrew Jenkinson's book on diet and obesity I don't know it. Andrew Jenkinson's, thank you. I'll check it out. Yeah, don't. Yeah, I gathered that. Don't. Yeah. Andrew Jenkinson's, don't know it. I'll check it out. I recommend Peter Attia, who writes about ketogenic diets, and Dr. Jason Fung, who writes about fasting. He's also got a YouTube channel. Thoroughly recommend it. I've just finished a 48-hour fast. I regularly do like 3-day fasts, and I'll do a 24 to 36-hour fast once a week. So that's resetting the body. So that's something else. That's a whole nother subject. But Jason Fung, who's he specializes in treating diabetes. So he's a lot of experience, and he knows exactly how to do it safely and so on. So I recommend his books. 𝐂𝐚𝐧𝐬𝐶 Wells, is there a particular dangfani tita jiao? Not really, because what happened was, after the Cultural Revolution, you had to choose really whether you wanted to work in the medical or the martial. They didn't let people, like before, you had that they call 𝐒𝐮. 𝐒𝐮 is like, they still got them in Hong Kong. Well, at least you had them in Hong Kong, where you have someone teaching Kung Fu and then have a clinic next door, which might be bone setting, it might be acupuncture. And so at that time, my Sifu's grandfather was that kind of generation. But now they say you either have to do the bone setting, medicine, or martial arts. They only give you a license for one. And so my Sifu never learned that medical tradition. I have a very good friend in Hong Kong who was a master of 𝐒𝐻𝐺 Kung Fu, and he gave me his recipe for 𝐒𝐻𝐺𝐸, and it's the best one that I've used. So I've used that one. So I wouldn't say it's particularly Dung family, but it's an old family recipe from the 𝐒𝐻𝐺 tradition, at least his family. So my internet dropped out. Oh, it's a shame, Joan. I just gave the big secret. So that's about the 𝐒𝐻𝐺. So get those likes up, people. Thank you, Lucas. 16 people, 9 likes. So 7 of you don't like me. Are there any studies on if martial arts can affect the brain? In what sense? I mean, I'd need to go a little bit more, like in what way you mean affect the brain? Making more neural collections, certainly. There's a concept that the brain evolved for complex movement. And so any studying of complex movements is massively good for the brain. So it's shown to be, there are some studies on things like neural degeneration in elderly people that practice Tai Chi, and it's shown to be very, very effective for that. But I don't know if you meant that or something else. So exercise is good for the brain in general. Concussion, not so much. Yeah, so if we're talking martial arts affect the brain, then it depends whether we're talking about full contact or not, doesn't it? Fasting is also good for the mind. Teaches you where your dependencies lie and how comparatively easy they can be to overcome. So you have a number of factors about that, right? The psychological addiction to food, and then this kind of idea that we have to eat a certain amount. Something terrible is going to happen if I don't eat, and then finding out actually it's in our evolutionary past we'd have likely have had long periods of fasting. That's normal. But we're so used to this idea of 3 meals a day, which is a complete social construct and really not correct. So you have the psychological thing, but then the physical idea of fasting as well. But you have to fast for about 72 hours to get what they the idea of it. And again, I'm talking, this is not my speciality, so I'm just giving this general knowledge for people. But I suggest you check out people like Peter Attia and Jason Fung and people like that. And so the idea is that the brain starts to break down proteins. Now people say, oh, that's bad, isn't it? Because once all your glycogen stores have been used up and so on, the body starts utilizing protein as a fuel source, you think, oh, you're going to lose your muscles. But if you think about it sensibly, if you were hunter-gatherers and you haven't caught anything for 3 days and your brain cannibalizes your muscles, you're stuffed. You're not hunting. So what it does is it targets junk protein, and so in the brain there's a certain amount of junk protein, and this gets pruned after fasting, which gives a much more clarity, mental clarity. It may also prevent Alzheimer's. I mean, it's not conclusive, but there were studies with rats that showed that it prevented Alzheimer's. So why? Because the junk DNA, which kind of clutters up the brain, gets broken down after fasting, but it's at somewhere around the 72-hour mark. So the recommendation is to do a long fast a couple of times a year for brain health. Improves the memory if you can remember the 88. Yeah, exactly, Mike. Exactly. It's agriculture for you, 3 meals a day. Yeah, it's an interesting book called The Diet Delusion, and there's some ideas that agriculture is well, here's the thing, right? If we didn't have agriculture, we wouldn't have freed up the time for technology and to develop our society and so on. So it was a great thing. But it also had a cost on our physical health. Absolutely had a cost on our physical health. And so we're wonderful. We are so lucky in this time. We are so lucky because we can have all the benefits of that culture, of that knowledge, of everything else, but we can now go back to a more of a paleo diet if we want to. So we can have the best of both worlds. We're super lucky. Alzheimer's and CJD are protein plaque-based diseases, so reasonable that fasting could help. Oh, thanks for that. Again, not my area, so I'm really happy to get some. What are your thoughts on rest days and exercise timing? Okay, now we're on to my area, so I can. So it depends on what kind of training you do. Okay, generally train every day. That's what I would say. Just train it. Just train every day. Just move. The more you move, the better. The more you practice, the better. Okay, but now if you're talking about something specific, like say you're working, I don't know, a bench press or a squat or some strength exercise, which is very, very demanding on the body. You've put some decent amount of weight on it. You're in the kind of 5 rep range, and you're really, really pushing. The body needs like probably 3 days to recuperate. What happens is, as it recuperates, they used to think it breaks down the muscle fibers and then they get rebuilt stronger or something like that, like a bone fracture. But now they know that's not the case. Only recently they've discovered that it's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the tension causing a hormonal response, and the hormonal response causes muscle growth, right? So that may be why some of the internal Qigong practices can create incredible strength gains as well, by the way. It may be working on the hormonal system. I think a lot of Qigong is actually manipulation of hormones, but anyway, that's another subject. So you do your exercise, and then the hormone release and the muscle gets stronger. If you train the same muscle in that window, you'll get weaker. So you need to rest. Resting means, first of all, not using those muscles for, say, 3 days. And the second thing is, it means you must get rest, sleep, high quality sleep, protein in your diet, high quality sleep and rest. That is the recipe for getting strong. Surprisingly little time actually training. If you want to be really, really strong, don't spend hours training. Like do cycle your exercises. So each body part gets a 2-3 day rest. You're probably training for an hour a day tops, and you're having lots of sleep and lots of food. And that's the recipe to get strong. Okay. Intriguing. Wait a minute. I got it's sat on a shelf for the last 20 years. So exercise time. So that's talking about strength training, specifically strength training. So internal Qigong affecting growth strength. Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. Is they did a research thing where they just got people doing what they called a hero pose, which was something like, yay, just like that. Ah, I'm a hero. And they had to like really kind of feel that and just make the noise and pump their fists and do that for about a minute every day. They just called it the hero pose, right? And so they got 2 groups, and study the group that one group did this thing every day and the other group didn't, and there was a 10% increase in testosterone just from that. So if you see some of these postures and mudras and shapes and stuff in the Qigong, this is interesting to me. I think it's tapping in on some of this primal, could be working on the emotional response. Like this one obviously is an emotional thing. Also physiological, some of the massage and points. Most of the energy centers correspond to glands as well. So if you look at, like in yoga, they have the chakras. They all seem to correspond to a gland, from the adrenals to the pineal. So I really think a lot of this energy work is hormonal. How about the ratio of static and dynamic stretching? Okay, so ratio of static and dynamic stretching. Martial art is ballistic. You're punching and kicking. If your goal is to kick high, you need dynamic stretching. And then there was a big thing in the West about 20 years ago or 30 years ago where all the sports coaches were saying, don't bounce, don't swing the legs, don't do this, don't do that. And so everyone stopped doing dynamic stretching. And in China, meanwhile, they're doing a lot of dynamic stretching. The way they used to do it in China when I was there, they would do the static first. So they would do the bar stretches, and then they would do like the 𝐒𝐚𝐽𝐸, the leg presses, the 𝐂𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐧𝐞, the splits. And then they would do the dynamic stretches after that. So front, inside, outside, diagonal, side, back, as like the wushu type exercises. And the same thing with the arm swings, dynamic swings, and those kind of things. So they would do the static first. I'm not entirely convinced about that, to be honest. My current training is I do some very easy dynamic stretching in the morning, but like really easy. I don't push it because I don't pull a muscle. I do easy dynamic stretching. I do my static stretching after my forms or run or when I'm sweating. So I'll do static stretching at the end of a workout. I won't do static stretching before I kick a bag or punching power training, because it seems to interfere with the explosive release force. So ratio of static and dynamic. I would say this is currently 10 minutes or so a day of dynamic stretching is really good. Static stretching, a couple of times a week, you can do a long stretch. Do it like in the evening or when you're not training afterwards as like an extra thing to increase your range of motion. It's how to squat by squatting with our backs against the wall. Does the ideal squat, you mean face to the wall, right? Not backs against the wall. Not so much into squatting with the backs against the wall. I think that teaches you to lean back and rest against the wall. I tend to face the wall, and I would do what I call a face the wall squat, where you're trying to slide down so you're sitting all the way to the floor, and that will teach you how your back should be. Does the ideal squat require your back straight perpendicular to the floor? Not necessarily perpendicular to the floor, no. There should be a natural curve, yeah, but not too much. So the way I would answer that, stand with your toes like 2 inches away from a wall with your nose facing the wall and squat all the way down, and that will stop you going too far forwards. Otherwise you smear your nose up against the wall. So the wall becomes the coach. And when you get to the bottom, play around with it and really try and open the hips and feel where that perfect position is. And if you're unsure, watch a toddler. When toddlers squat down and play, picking up their Lego bricks or something, 2-year-olds, that's the perfect posture. Slightly curved, yes. Jonesy, belief and placebo effect is very powerful. Yeah, that's another subject, isn't it? You're talking about the hero pose, right? In terms of the release of hormones. Placebo effect is something that's just very, very interesting, isn't it? Is that not what we're really tapping into, is the mind-body connection? And again, in Chinese medicine, it's not so much placebo as the inseparability of mind and body, in terms of that they're one system. So I find it a little more comfortable with my back in neutral and slightly curved, but I feel like I'm putting a lot of tension in the lower back. Could you, if you could possibly either take a picture or a video and message it to me, you can upload it on YouTube with a private link so no one else can see it, and then just send me the link and I'll be happy to give you some feedback. But I can't really say until I've seen it. If you feel like you're putting tension in the back, then be very careful, because it shouldn't feel like that. Maybe you need to stretch your thoracic spine, your upper back, because the more flexible your thoracic spine is, the less stress you put on your lower back, because you're not having to compensate for the balance. Okay, so that may be a... Chakras correspond to neuroendocrine nexuses, nexi, or whatever. What's your view on acupoints, meridians? I assume you mean, when you say what's my view, you mean what do I think they correspond to in the Western scientific sense? I don't know. I've read loads of stuff on this, loads of research, loads of reports, nothing conclusive. I don't know if they do, whether there's an actual, do they correspond to the fascia lines? Do they correspond to the nerves? Do they correspond to, somebody was suggesting, well, there is one thing, is that the meridians have there's a different electrical resistance. So when you measure conductivity, you'll find on acupuncture points there's an increase of conductivity. So there's something possibly electrical, but it's not nerves. They don't track. One thing, just to give you some idea, when we were talking about when we were studying acupuncture, I put a needle at a point, say large intestine 4, and stimulate it quite strongly, and you get the propagation of the qi, which is the needling sensation, and you can feel it like going up the arm. You can feel it kind of transmitting across the meridian. When you look at an anatomy book, and you see the path of the nerve and where it varies from the meridian, it tends to follow the meridian, not the nerve. Make of that what you will. But it seems to me that the meridian is not the same as the nerve. But also, thank you, you're right, was face to the wall. Yeah, cool. What's your view on acupoints, meridians? So the problem is that there are so many acupuncture points, 365 acupuncture points, and they correspond to different things. So some of them are on arteries, some are on nerves, some are on like neither. An acupuncture point literally means in Chinese means a cavity or a cave or a hole. So like when you run your hand down, you find these little indentations. So this is where the energy kind of, there's a point that you can stimulate. So around joints, you can usually find them as being like more, when you practice acupuncture for a long time, you sort of almost fall into them because you become attuned to them. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, I learned it from a Chinese medicine perspective, not from a Western. There is such a thing as what they call medical acupuncture, where they do everything from myofascial release and trigger point therapy and so on. It doesn't seem to be the same. It doesn't seem to be as good or as potential, as far-reaching, as useful. Okay. Next bit. Belief is half of being, they say. I like it. I find slightly bending the knees helps standing. Okay, yeah. Fascia is very interesting. Read electrics. Electrics, yeah, that's right. This, how I suspect, is going on. And fascia is also important to do with, I assume you've heard of a concept called tensegrity. So for the transmission of force through the body relies on these kind of, so some of the postures are stretched. Like in Tai Chi, we're relaxed, but we're not relaxed. They're stretched, so the fascia is often tight, so the force can transmit through, but where the muscles themselves are kept relaxed. So this is interesting. So what I suspect is, and psychoneuroimmunology. So here's the thing. Oh my God, Lucas, you're over my paycheck here. Psychoneuroendocrinology. It's easy for you to say. I'll take your word on that one. So where was I? Okay, so what I'm thinking is happening. Yes, love that word, tensegrity. Yeah, I think tensegrity is really important in martial arts. Okay. Let's say, for example, you have, if you see, you've all seen the map of the metro system, the London metro system, right? So, you'll say, right, I'm at this stop and I want to go that stop. So I'll take three stops on the Jubilee line and then transfer to the Northern line. I'll take 4 stops on the Northern line and blah, 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 blah. So the map helps you, you know where you are, you know where you want to go. Okay. If you actually look at, Google Earth image of London and you put points where all the train stops are, it doesn't look anything like the tube map. But the tube map's really useful. It's functional. It's not meant to look exactly the same as what's really going on, but it's a way of, we can use it to predict. So if we want to get from here to here, this is how we do it. And I think the same thing about meridians and the Chinese concept of the organs. We can see how they relate to each other. I know if I do this point, that will affect that. This line crosses that line. For example, you've got spleen, kidney, connecting here. If I do that point, I'm going to do that. So it gives you a map, and perhaps it doesn't correspond to physically what's going on. Maybe it's just functionally what's going on. The map is not the territory again, yes. So possibly, I'm not saying this, maybe there is a correlation with something that they haven't discovered yet, but I'm open to the idea that it might not be. It might simply be a functional map as opposed to a physical map. The map is not the terrain. There we go. Great minds think alike. Simon meet Lucas, Lucas meet Simon. You guys would have a great conversation because you're both very smart. Mike, based on an electrical circuit. Okay, so yes. Example is when we do the qigong, we put the tongue to the roof of the mouth, and we were talking about yesterday, there's a gentle drawing up from the perineum underneath. And so the concept of that is like the abdomen is like the battery, like the breath is like the pump. And then the energy can come up, can go down, can go through the tongue and come back around. So the tongue is like an electrical switch. When you touch, you're turning the circuit on, which they call the microcosmic orbit in qigong. And an interesting thing, if you experiment with the tongue on the roof of the mouth, very lightly, when you find the point, it does feel electrical. It feels like putting your tongue on a battery. Yes, that's something we used to do. We used to put our tongues on batteries. But you can feel something. That might be what they call the subtle body and energy body. Yes. It's an electric universe. Yes. What's electricity? Electrons. So you've got positive, negative, yin, yang. What's an atom? Proton, electron, plus, minus. We're all touching tongue to the roof of the mouth now, aren't we? And you read that wrong, didn't you? But yeah. So you can do this as an experiment. Sit so your back is straight. Find that point. And breathe from the lower abdomen. You need a few minutes usually for the mind to go very quiet until you can start to get the sense of energy. And you know, if you have a coal or a piece of coal and you breathe on it, you're fanning the flames, it glows, it gets warm. Imagine that's at the dantian and your breath is like fanning the flames of that. Now, if you practice that every day for 15 minutes or so, you'll start to build enough energy that then you can start to mentally lead it through the circuit, up the spine, tongue to the roof of the mouth, and down. So a beginner exercise, you can breathe in, imagine it rising up the spine, breathe out, imagine it coming back down to the dantian. So it's in, out. The up is hard because there's certain areas that are often blocked. The base of the spine is a blockage for a lot of people. The energy goes to a trickle. So that might take a while. It's sort of like you have a water building up until it pushes through the blockage. And then there's often a blockage in the mid-spine. There's also often a blockage on the base of the skull. But then usually this part is fairly easy. Once you've got past that, it's usually... Anyway, you can experiment with that. Now I have a hot flash. Well, that's okay. That's okay. There's nothing that feels like touching an electrical circuit. There you go. Microcosmic orbit. Yes, that's right. 𝐂𝐻𝐿. Whereabouts on the roof of the mouth? Well, it's where you find that point. For most people, it's just behind the teeth. Maybe that far behind the teeth. But some people, it's right at the top. That's why you have to kind of feel around. So often in martial art, you put the tongue to the roof of the mouth. Now that might be from a functional. If you're talking about fighting, obviously, if you've got your tongue out and you get punched, you bite your tongue off. So keeping the tongue to the roof of the mouth can stop you getting your tongue injured. Also, biting the teeth together in case you get hit in the jaw, and also to prevent whiplash and to prevent concussion. You keep this. But I think for energy practice, it's just light, very light. Can't touch the top. That's a shame. In yoga, there are a bunch of different points from the ridge above the teeth to the back of the palate. Okay. So yoga has a complete system, and qigong has a complete system, but I don't think we can mix them. I don't think we can mix them. They don't seem to be compatible in the sense that they seem to have different. It's a bit like an Apple, iOS and a Windows. You can't run that program on that. You can't run that program on that. It's not to say one's better or worse than another, but they, you talk about the map is not the territory. Okay, this map works. This is a completely different representation of the same thing. It works. But if you're using this map to navigate, so some people use like the chakras and put them in the qigong exercises and all that, and I really think that's a mistake. I don't think that's useful. Don't think that's useful. But it's interesting. I mean, I've read yoga books and so on. I'm interested in it. But for your practice, I wouldn't mix them. You have a short frenulum, PJ. Good way to look at it. Yeah, it works. I'm tongue-tied right to the tip. Okay. How are we doing? So I've got a couple more minutes. If anyone has any other questions, but I have to be gone in like 5. Like the 5 blind men and the elephant, different perspectives. Yeah, something like that. Although they all see different parts of the elephant, right? So this perspective is right for the tail, this is right for the head, this is right for the legs. But I think yoga and Tai Chi both describe the whole elephant, but different perspectives. I think they're both complete systems. So, if there are no other questions, that was a good waffle. I enjoyed that. Thanks, guys. Hope you found something useful. The most important, I mean, these waffles are great. As I said, you know, I used to get a lot of ideas from my sifu, just chatting and waffling around is useful stuff, but only if you're combining it with actual practice. You have to practice every day. So the other thing I'd say, guys, is get a Asian versus Indian elephants. Yeah, very good. More on Qigong for strength next time. Yeah, certainly. Happy to do that. And there's some interesting bits and bobs with that as well, which we can talk about. What was I saying? Yeah, so make sure that you practice every day. Just, you know what, even if it's just 5 minutes, do your standing Qigong, do your horse dance, whatever it is, just get in the practice every day, because that's where the development, it's about being consistent, and a little bit done every day is way better than occasionally doing loads and splurging and then not doing anything for 3 weeks and then going crazy and then not doing anything for a month. So try and get daily practice, and it doesn't have to be hard, doesn't have to be a lot, but it picks up momentum. It's like, you know, when you make a snowman and you start with that little ball and you roll it and it just picks up and it picks up. So a little change of diet, little change of exercise habit, little change of breathing habit, whatever it is, very small, but if you do it consistently and it builds momentum, usually find in like 3 months you can make ridiculous progress, whereas some people train for years and years and years and don't, because they're doing this instead of doing this. And it accelerates as well. The more you do, it accelerates, so it just gets better and better. Or is that back of comic Charles Atlas adds dynamic? Yeah, dynamic tension is used in the hard style Qigong. Yeah, thanks, Anne. Hard style Qigong. And I'm also interested because Charles Atlas, you said it, he's iconic, right? He's rep Atlas. It's one of the gods, right? So that's also to do with another side of Qigong, which is the kind of spiritual embodiment of the what do you call them, the archetypes. Yeah, which I think is the Western way of saying what the Chinese would describe as spirit possession. Einstein said the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. Yes, he did. He was very cool. He also said imagination is more important than knowledge as well. Very cool guy. Okay, we will go now. I need to go, but thank you all very much. Great waffle, enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time. Monday, Tai Chi. Tomorrow, Zoom for the Academy members. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. And I will see you all next time. Thank you. Have a good night.